It's very important to understand that African Americans, unlike any other ethnic group in the country, were imported for the point of servitude. So if you look at life prior to voting, which is the 15th Amendment for African American men and the 19th Amendment for African American women, life was very unfair. There was a legalized system of Jim Crow and segregation and enslavement. So the 15th Amendment that happens in the 1870s allowed African American men to exercise their voice as full citizens and be able to occupy public office and legislate laws according to equity and justice. We have a right to not vote. That's a very narrow mind to take. However, when we look at the bloody history of African American seizing the franchise or the vote, we have a right to enter those ballot boxes and cast a vote. There are three books I would like to mention for people to look at. One is Rayford Logan's book called Betrayal of the Negro, which examines the failure of Reconstruction in the 1870s after the Civil War. The second book would be the newest book, The Third Reconstruction, by William Barber. And he is a minister in North Carolina leading a massive crusade for equity and anti-gerrymandering in North Carolina. Between those two books, you get the retrospective with Logan and you get the prospective with Barber to understand the literal bloody struggle for African Americans to obtain the right to vote and the bloody struggle that was used to take it away. So to not vote is to basically continue to desecrate that blood of those white African Americans, religious and lay people who went about making this world a fair place. It's a choice you can make, but it's probably not the most informed. It's not so much the national elections, which definitely do impact us all nationally, but there are smaller regional and local elections that impact how money is distributed along a city line. In Washington, D.C., for example, there was a surplus in the budget several years ago, and at the same time, several youth shelters for teenage homeless were closed. How can you have a surplus and then close shelters to help homeless teenagers? Now, we know that sex trafficking is happening. Why are these teenagers homeless? We have to really ask some of these sociological questions and find out what is causing this kind of lack in society. But no, just close the shelters. So that leaves them now homeless and no place to get whatever treatments they need. So schoolrooms, teachers are picking up the slack. They have lending closets and pantries in various public schools where they're feeding children. In Baltimore during the uprising, the librarian, Dr. Carla Hayden, now at the Library of Congress, kept the libraries open so the children could be sheltered because they couldn't go home. There were no buses running. So these basic needs that we think of, those of us who have them, for those who don't have them, how do you navigate the world? So someone needs to be a voice of reason and balance for them. And voting is that conversation because it makes me now see what the lack is for the elderly, the homeless, for someone with chronic disease. If that's not my issue, I don't see it. But voting forces me now to see this other community as myself. The faith community, irrespective of its particular denomination or affiliation, is a seek for justice and fairness. So I believe, and once again, Reverend Barber has done an excellent job with his Moral Mondays in making an ecumenical call for justice and equity. And in his book, The Third Reconstruction, he very clearly lays out a 14-point plan to be able to have people come together and seek the balanced and humane way of living. So that transcends all faith groups. It's simply a matter of being able to live as human beings equitably and in fairness on the planet. Well, historically, the African American church has always been that space, that interstitial space within the community to be able to feed the homeless, to care for those who are mentally unstable, as well as those coming repatriating from imprisonment back to the community. So that's what we've always done. We now have to ramp it up to look at single mothers, homeless children, people with congenital and chronic disease. It has gotten so much larger than just simply a matter of giving someone a backpack and sending them to school, but to really look at the emotional wholeness and wellness of a person. So you have some homeless children, you have homeless parents, people who cannot afford to live in various cities who are being displaced. So the larger issue is how do we regulate businesses from being so greedy, eating up all of our city space, and how do we regulate city government from not being able just to turn over lands to developers? So it becomes a matter of the church now speaking, or the faith community speaking, and being able to let people live where they work, to be able to afford where they live, and to be able to afford food and clothing. So the issue is far greater than just simply a matter of one aspect of someone's life. It's the whole entire health, wellness. All of these things are being challenged, and people are being boxed in and being forced to do things that are radically unfair. So the society needs to really reevaluate who and how are we going to live in this future that's becoming very digitized, very gentrified, and very stratified by class and education and economics. Just an aside, we have in 1919, the Red Summer of 1919, where black men were slaughtered after World War I. That same year, we're going to have the passage, a year later, the passage of the 9th Amendment for women to vote. So we have 2019 and 2020 coming up. So we have centennials of very prominent events happening in history. And if you do not know your history, you're what? Doomed to repeat it. So I encourage millennials in this information age to Google Rayford Logan, to Google William Barber, to become familiar with the overall narrative of the conversation of justice and injustice. And once you come up with what you feel justice is, to crusade for that, as people have before.
I think that voting is a popularity contest. And I say that because, there are certain ideologies, there are certain beliefs that individuals have in this country, and not even just in this country, but in several countries, that may not fit the status quo. And if it doesn't fit the status quo, that's when I would say that my vote may not make a difference, simply because it's not popular. And I feel like when you have a majority of people saying that, well, things have always been this way, let's just keep it this way, let's just be comfortable, it sort of silences the change that I would like to see. And I don't feel like that change has come as quickly as I would like. But again, it all reverts back to what I said before. I feel that voting is definitely a popularity contest. I think that when people vote, they vote on behalf of the people that think like them. They vote for the good of themselves. I don't think that man votes for the good of everyone else. I think that inherently a person is just going to vote based upon how that vote is going to affect their lifestyle. I wish that there were more people who cared enough about others to vote for their interests, to say, well, you know what, I see that this is what's going on. Maybe this is the official I need to lean towards because they could be that, they could make that difference. But I don't think that that's how it works. So while I treasure the right to vote, I don't know that it always makes a difference. I would not say that the voting process is fair. I don't think that it's fair because, historically we've had elected officials, people that are in office right now, people that are getting paid by our tax dollars, people that are essentially working for us. They're very vocal about the fact that they don't feel that a certain type of person should vote, or they're very vocal about changing voting laws in the midst of the voting process. I think you have certain elected officials who are making it more difficult. And, I don't know that it's fair because I think, again, it goes back to what I was saying before, this being a popularity contest. It's become, Congress has become more of an establishment than anything else. You have certain folks who have been there for umpteen years. And I think that, if you're a part of the good old boys or good old girls club, that, you're going to have your friends doing whatever it is that they need to do to make sure that you stay inside of that club, or actually to make sure that they stay inside of that club. It's kind of like what's going on with the police brotherhood right now, for instance. There are a lot of good cops out there, just as well, there are a lot of bad cops out there. But you have to look at the good cops and wonder, are you really that good if you're not willing to speak up against brutality, against the things that are occurring within your brotherhood that are not right? Or are you more concerned about the backlash? Are you more concerned about what's going to happen to you if you open your mouth? Which I think makes you not that good of a cop to begin with. You have to be willing to speak up. And I think that that's what makes a good elected official, the one who's not afraid to say what they really feel, the one who, like I said before, who is not afraid to speak against the status quo. But as long as you have this good old boys and good old girls club, you're never going to have a fair voting ground. I don't think that's the case. I think that people are very hesitant to change. when it comes to our government. And I think right now, a lot of the folks who are in office, some of the names that we're familiar with, I think that even now people are voting based upon those names and really nothing else. Why do I choose to vote? I think that's like asking a business owner why they look for the most qualified candidate to manage their affairs. When you're not present, someone is representing you, and whatever bad decision they make is ultimately going to determine what your livelihood is going to be like moving forward. And so I look at voting in the same exact way. You know, I am voting people into office who are speaking on my behalf, who have become my voice. And if that voice is going to directly affect my livelihood, I want to make sure that the most qualified candidate is stepping into office on my behalf. Aside from that, I also have parents that may be a little bit older than some of my other friends and colleagues, and because they chose to have me at a later age. And so my experience with voting is a little bit different because I know some of the stories that they have told me. Like, for instance, my father is 71. He was born in 1945. And so the experiences that he lived through may have been a little different than those who have parents that are a little bit younger than mine. I remember him talking to me about his inability to vote, his inability to attend school because at the time certain officials thought that it would be better to shut down the schools rather than integrate them because they weren't ready for that. And so when I think about situations like that, it leads me to believe that, and while this may sound trite, history does repeat itself. And I know personally some of the things that people have gone through to make sure that this could be a possibility for me. I think to just sort of throw it away and take it for granted does a great disservice not only to me, but also to individuals in my community. And so that's why I choose to vote. Well, I think it's important to understand that even after you elect people into office, you need to be very active in the community. You need to be active in the community even before the election process begins. And I think specifically in the Black community, we need to understand that there is not just one time to go out and vote, and that's for the president. I think that we need to understand that we have to educate ourselves on the local level. These people are going out here and they are representing us. You know, you have the Electoral College. We don't directly elect the vice president or president. We have these folks electing those folks on our behalf. So you do have to be involved in your community. Once you become involved in your community, your voice, it strengthens. You know, people will start to know who you are. People will start to listen once you start making those changes. But I think as long as you forget to do that, as long as you decide that, oh, the only time I need to go vote is when I'm voting for either the vice president or the president, you're always going to have a problem. But another thing is, too, as far as holding them accountable, once they get into office, you need to stay on top of them. You need to make sure that they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do when they were voted into office. And if they don't do that, then they go bye-bye. It's as simple as that. You know, again, we can't keep sticking with people simply because they belong to a certain party. You know, you have to say, is this person going to be the best person for my community? And if they're not, am I going to vote them out and vote someone else in? Not decide to say that, oh, okay, well, they've been in there for 10, 20 years. You know what, let's just keep this rolling. Or say, oh, they belong to this particular party. Let's just keep this rolling. The other guy's bad or the other lady's bad. You can't do that. But it all starts with you being active in the community. That's the bottom line. You know, and I don't think that in certain communities that's not done enough. There's a lot of complaining going on, but there's no doing. We all have an active role. It's almost like if you go to a military base, they say that everybody is responsible for the security of that base. you're equally as responsible for the security of your community.
Well, I feel this system here, this is, again, this is about educating yourself too about the true history. You know, I'm American where yet, you know, you'll see where if I go for a job, it'll say African American. I really don't like that term. I'm a black man who was born in America, so I'm Black American. African American is officially really not a race, you know what I mean? If you really look it up. So therefore I feel like the system was really not created to be equal and fair for black people. It's been this way. But I also feel like it's not just like, oh, all white people are bad. No, we, you know, as a people have to come together. There was a time when black people used to have communities, you know what I mean, where we used to look out for each other. We used to, you know, really get involved on political things and jobs and just getting out there, you know, with crime. You know, you see a lot of times black people are even harming ourselves. But then again, I don't like that argument too, because if you look at the conditions that are set up, right, in these ghettos in America, right, it's not, I feel like it's not by choice. You know, if you go back to Reaganomics, when Reagan was, you know, elected, the whole crack era, like, you know, there was government officials that were actually putting drugs into the communities, you know, to oppress the certain type of people. So if you have no jobs and no education, and that's the only way to survive, even if they were white people in those conditions, they're going to act the same. We all have the, you know, the savage beast in us. So I feel like black people, they get, you know, kind of looked at as, oh, they're you know, the thugs, or, you know, they're bad people, they sell drugs, but who's bringing the drugs into the community? So this all goes back to, like I said, the people who represent you, these elected officials, the political system itself that's set up. It's not set up to be a fair process. You know, heck, the Constitution was wrote when we were considered, what, 3/5 of a person? So that says a lot. If we have lawmakers and officials who say we have the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, well, when that was written, we were not even considered full human being to them. So that I get deep into it like that, you know, where it's like this system was never made to be equal for me or to have the same opportunities as others that don't look like me. But it's up to us to work harder. It's like it's what it is. You know, there's a disconnect between communities and elected officials because we're seeing, you know, a process go on where the communities are not being represented. Again, you have elected officials that they go out and they make promises and they say what they're going to do, and they're not really doing, you know, what they say they're going to do. But at the same time, there's some people that then say, my vote doesn't count, I'm not going out and vote, where that's not good as well. So again, you have to you have to really be consistent with voting, you know, locally, nationally, and really, you know, going out there, even calling up your representatives locally, and, you know, sticking together as a community to hold the elected officials accountable. So elected officials could feel like, hey, if I don't do what I say I'm going to do, then my seat may be lost. You know, we're going to vote you out. Make sure you educate yourself about the political process. Again, going back, I tend to see in a lot of communities, you know, I grew up in New York City, and then I moved to Virginia, and I see that there's a lot of people that are not, you know, privy to the whole political process and, you know, how important local elections are, where it's so often I hear so many people saying, hey, you know, they're just waiting for the national election. So educate yourself, you know your candidates, you know that they represent the same views that you have, and that they have a history, you know, of delivering for that, you know, like they could show, you know, like, look, I've been for the people. You know, I'm not just for the corporations or just, you know, to get a seat and have this certain, you know, position, but not actually doing their job. Like, do your job. You know what I mean? Like, if we don't do our job, we don't get paid. So it should be, you know, the same way with our elected officials, because that's important. They pass laws that affect our homes, you know, no matter who you are, white, black, Hispanic, any communities, like, you have to hold them accountable. They have a job, they get paid by our tax dollars, you know? So if they're not held accountable, of course, they're going to represent for the lobbyists that do pay them, you know, nice amounts. So they're not going to represent for you. And then the communities will get mad, but it's like you're not involved, you're not educating yourself, you're not holding them accountable. You're not going out, you know, to do whatever you need to do, grassroots and what have you. You know, you have to get involved because it affects you.
I think oftentimes because we identify with one group, we tend to discount or discredit other groups because we're not necessarily involved in that process, and sometimes we become blind to what's actually going on within our own parties and in our own houses, so to speak. And so I think we have to understand that inclusion is not necessarily synonymous with respect. It's not also synonymous with equality. And so I think we have to also keep that in mind. One of the main things that can be done to address racism in the process is more intention and more education around the issues. I think once we know and understand what the law is, how the law is applied, and what we can do if we feel like we're being if we feel like our rights are being infringed upon, I think knowing exactly what the protocols are and how we can still take part in the process, we have to also understand intention behind suppression and oppression of votes and the process is to, one, know if you go to a polling place, if you know you've registered and you know that your name has been listed on this roll, but it somehow got purged from the process, that there is a provisional ballot that you can cast. You know, there are hotlines that you can call. Just being aware of resources and opportunities in those spaces will allow one, for you to be included in that process, and also to make people aware of what other techniques that may be happening to people who don't have your same knowledge. So what I would advise people to do is that before going to vote, know what numbers you can call. Call ahead to your elections commissioner. Call ahead to groups like the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. You know, call ahead to groups like that who can provide you with the information so you go in knowing if something happens, what to do. So it's not like a delayed response. It's something that you can do right then and there to really take control. Really, it's about control. So taking control of your place in this process. It takes a village, and I think we have to get back to the principles of that it takes a village, no matter if it's raising a child, whether it's taking care of your community, it takes a village. And if we know that there's someone in our communities that don't have the resources that they need in order to be involved in the process, then it's upon us to make sure that we can help them achieve that. So with everything that's taking place around us, from increased rates of poverty to discrimination in the workplace and in society, I think to really understand what your role is as a citizen and to take the value and the pride that I think we've worked so long to kind of establish, that a mechanism like the Voting Rights Act is definitely needed. We need to protect what is ours and our rights. And so the Voting Rights Act is needed today more so than any other day.
Once you know who you are and the information that you have, and as well as the knowledge, no one can take that from you. So when you get that information, you spread the information, and you get people knowledgeable, then they can't take that from you, and then you put yourself in a position that you can actually run for positions or hold for offices, and that you become more powerful as a body, not just a race, but a body of people, because you have a national gathering and just a local agenda. I believe that us as African Americans have to go back to our very foundational roots. There's actually a study that I want to get done. It's on the civil rights movement. And I want to look at it not just being as a movement, but a place of being and a state of being for us, because we have made so many great strides and accomplishments in that era of time. So just imagine if we gone back to our school systems, it'd be teachers, be principals, be deans. If we go back into being into our libraries, people are seeing African Americans being that person of head, of being in charge, and actually showing that reading is empowering, showing that we have people that are in park and recreations, but showing that we have things that give you activities and give you jobs, or giving you things that can actually enhance you as an individual, to show that there is more for you than just the streets. It may just been crime, maybe just getting by just because you live in a poverty area. Also, we have things that becoming a police officer, being a fire department. You know, all those things benefit us as African Americans, of showing that we have representation in those particular areas, to show that we can be empowered. That gives us the education, the knowledge, and also the aspiring to be what we want to see.
on the one end, where you have, because we happen to have a large group of black men in this country that have been, that have lost the ability to be a part of the political process for reasons relating to crime and social issues, and those laws that prohibit them from being a part of the process, or to then become a part of the process again after their time of being incarcerated, I think in a way denies them the ability to fully become ingrained back into society. And in some instances, I believe it's intentional, because I think in a lot of ways the political systems might feel that those men would cast votes or move in a way that would jeopardize their standings or the processes that happen in the status quo. In society where men have not had that situation happen, I feel like men, African American men, don't always understand the value of their voice. And when they do, they not only become an asset to their community, they then become the force that drives change within a family and within an entire community. Boys do what they see men do, or boys are attracted by or influenced by what they see men do. And so if a young black boy sees a man or men in his community are part of the political process or part of what goes on in their community that are affecting not just their lives, but the lives of all those around them, in more instances than not, they want to emulate that behavior. And so I think you do what you see. And I think they would definitely do that if they saw that take place more. Well, I would say one of the first things that the faith-based community is doing is to actually letting parishioners know that it's okay to be both faithful and political and activist, participating in activism. Religious organizations have always been, I feel, socially active in that their work in communities and kind of helping people that society pushes to the side. But I think now more than ever, faith-based organizations are seeing the power or the voice that they have to impact what's going on in the political process, and not always so much politics, but in communities and neighborhoods and cities and states in general. Faith-based organizations are now, as they did in times past, are participating now in getting parishioners and citizens and voter registration drives and kind of having community-based activities at their churches and not being so closed insular into their own specific activities, but really addressing the needs that are happening right in their communities and their cities and their states by extension. And so I think faith-based organizations are now kind of using all of the arms of influence and access that they have to move political processes, well, not processes, but political initiatives in the way that they are able to. Well, I think one of the most powerful methods of reaching young people nowadays, like it or lump it, is social media. The power of social media has gone far beyond what I believe, ever imagined that it would. I mean, we understand that social media can be used for good or can be used for bad. I think we need to access the power and the influence that social media has over young people or with young people to not just educate them, but to then move them to action. And so use the materials or the things that they see on social media or through social media, and then move them into venues and into activities that get boots on the ground, that get them moving in their communities, that get them a part of processes to affect change. So I think that's where systems and organizations have to then actively move to reach out to those young people after we get them excited. I mean, it's almost like a preacher in church. You get people excited in service, or we'll use the church experience as an example of that. People come to church, they hear a message that encourages them or touches some part of their soul or their psyche that elicits an emotional response from them. But if it's only eliciting an emotional response and not a lifestyle change, then it's just something nice that you heard and it made you feel good for the moment. But you haven't taken any action to sustain what you got out of that good feeling and out of that moment. And in the same way, we can be excited by the videos that we see or the movements that we see, and it says, you know what, yes, power to the people, or do this thing and do that thing. But what does power look like in my neighborhood? What does power look like on my street? What does power look like in the educational system in the area that I live in? What does power look like at the food bank? What does power look like when housing, we're being priced out of our neighborhoods? And so moving us beyond those thoughts and those feelings of wanting to do something to actually moving us to a place where we can get involved in activities that do move the needle. And let's say you get them to the place where they get involved in that group or that organization. They want to see change right now. And so I think it's the balance between getting them successes immediately that feed that need to see immediate success or that instant gratification, but also then moving them or exposing them to a space that some things are going to take some time, and being okay with the processes that get you to long-term change, that everything is not going to be fixed right away, and you can't become disenfranchised when things don't happen that way. You still have to be committed to the process, committed to the initiative, to see it to its end.
Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.